Everyone, today we got a pretty cool list. So this is for people who really enjoy the grindy attrition of mid-range. And so if you're coming from other TCGs, this would be like Jund and Magic is the most easy analogy to compare it to, where you're kind of looking at the raw stat lines of most of your cards. You're not really looking at synergy or combined effects. You are just looking like pound for pound, what value am I getting out of each individual card? And then is that adding up to something that's ultimately more powerful when they're like all isolated, right? So when every top deck is good, you're kind of looking for that kind of deck. So that's pretty similar to what we have here today. You just put every card in your deck that is just individually very powerful. The way this works is that you just kind of play every single card that is just good. And it sounds a little silly and a little simplistic, but you know, for anyone who's familiar with these cards, we have Astrabbit. You know, raw value wise, you're putting the 5 defense down and getting to go look at 3 cards and pick one to your hand. Inherently strong. And when we go down the line, they're all kind of like that. Galaxia, mostly here just because it's a 5 power, right? When you play it, because it'll have its effect, swap its attack and defense. And 5 is pretty good. Most things that have these like synergistic style effects that decks are playing, the 1-drops for are usually in the 4 power category. So you can think of something like Elestrals, right? Or Spark It. Like these are all cards that, you know, when you combine them all together, they're very powerful, of course, but their stat lines are a little bit weaker than some other stuff out there. So a 5 would, you know, clear one of those and still live around afterwards. So really powerful stuff. But then you get even into further territory with the 6 powers, right? So we have Moss Station. Moss Station, when you attack with it, for the turn you're playing it, is a 6 power, which is like even better, right? Because if your opponent's also playing like good value stat creatures at 5, what's even better? Just play something at 6, right? So this card is really powerful. It'll like clear most stuff when it comes down. That's relevant right now. And you know, this will get over Astrabbit, for example, right? Because it's at 6, so it breaks that 5 defense. Super, super sweet. And you, of course, are at the liability of it going into defense when you play it, but depending on what the board is, if they have nothing left, then all you need is some kind of counter rune protection, like Gorgons or Shield, or even like Tsunami, and you're good to go, right? It's going to live to untap and swing again for 6 when you need to. Or you can stall the board out and just play it in attack position at 6, and most stuff your opponent's going to play is not going to be able to clear that, so your board is perfectly safe. And it's the same logic for Moss Station too, right? This one's situationally like better and worse. Like it's kind of hard to directly compare which one is better. I don't really have an answer for that, but they both serve a similar function, right? Which is that you have these really good stat lines. Moss Station at least can be playing defense, stall out until you want to swap into attack position, or you can just play attack position, keep the gas pedal on, and always be expending that spirit to just tempo the board down. So this one's actually really flexible. And if we look through the rest of these, similar philosophy, right? We have Lava Lift. We don't need 3 because, like, you know, having the redundant copies in your hand is a really big problem. But 2 is perfectly fine. Incredible card on its own. An interesting one here is actually Boombat. So Boombat is kind of cool because the philosophy behind it is that it's just kind of similar to like an earthquake style effect, right? Being able to just pay 1 to just clear an Elestral for the turn, even though it requires your summon, which is like the main downside of it, and it is liable to something like Gorgon's Gaze. But just having this, especially as more cards are going to come in that have protection against counter runes, we're already seeing that, where there's a lot of stuff popping up now that, you know, it says like cannot be chained by counter runes, things like that. It makes things like PTA or Shield a little bit harder to get value out of. So if you just play Boombat and just trade with even like a 1 cost is sometimes okay, but if your opponent sends in like a 2 or a 3 cost and you just pay 1 disenchant and clear it, it's pretty gas, right? And finally, to round it out here, we have Viscerus. So Viscerus, incredibly powerful, right? You're talking a 5 power stat line, but when it destroys something in combat, it's going to go tutor for another one, right? And so then it's going to be a 6. You go all the way up to a 7, but this card is probably like one of the best I think 1-drops I can imagine, right? Like this card is so strong, and it's been splashed into a lot of different decks, and Thunder Nexus decks for splashing green just to play this. Earth Beaters was like basically like defined by the strength of this card, and so of course it is fitting to include it here. But this is what we talk about when we talk about 1 card value, right? Like this thing can get so much mileage if it just stays and you're able to proceed with your game plan. So if we go into runes and spirits, we got a lot of spirits because we're playing a 4-color deck, but pretty standard lineup for the runes. You have your 3 copies of Gorgons, PTA, Tsunami, nothing out of the ordinary there. And we do have 3 copies of Ambrosia because you splash so many spirits. The management can get pretty tough. We got some Earthquakes, right? Just really clean, simple removal. Some Nectar of the Gods for a little bit of card draw, right? When we're talking about good value cards that, technically nets you 1, pay 1 card to draw 2. The life total is, it is worth considering. I think that's why most decks don't just immediately include 3 Nectar of the Gods, but just having more access to more cards for a deck like this, I think is pretty important. And you have 2 copies of Resting on Your Laurels as the occasional 1 cost removal. And especially in a deck like this, where you're kind of just going pound for pound, like 1 Elestral, you're not playing any Divine Runes, there's no Stadiums, you are pretty likely to only just have 1 Elestral on the field at a time, so it's pretty easy for you to meet the condition of resting. That's a deck. Like I said, if you like grinding mid-range, give this one a shot. Until next time, thank you for watching.